A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. You know, most people think that if you want to track a billion-dollar spy satellite, you need a high-security clearance, a windowless room in Langley, and maybe a thumbprint scanner. But it turns out, all you really need is a decent laptop, a lawn chair, and a very specific kind of obsession with orbital mechanics. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the world of satellite boffins. These are the hobbyists who spend their nights tracking objects in low Earth orbit, not because they're playing amateur international spy, but because they just think the math is neat.
It is a fascinating subculture, Corn, and honestly, it is the perfect time to talk about this because the lines are getting so blurry. With everything happening globally, especially with the recent tensions between Iran and Israel, everyone is looking at satellite data. But the people Daniel is talking about, the boffins or sat observers, are a completely different breed from the OSINT analysts you see on Twitter. By the way, today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash, which is fitting since we're talking about high-tech observation. I am Herman Poppleberry, and I've been digging into the data strings these guys use, and it is genuinely impressive how much they can see from their backyards.
It's wild. We're talking about a guy in a cardigan in suburban Germany spotting a US reconnaissance satellite repositioning over the Middle East before the official intelligence agencies even acknowledge it exists. Daniel mentioned that this anorak community, and for our American listeners, an anorak is basically a British term for a very dedicated, slightly nerdy hobbyist, is motivated by the science, not the politics. But they've accidentally become a major factor in modern operational security.
That's the core tension. These guys are like the amateur astronomers of the Space Force era. To an OSINT analyst, a satellite is a tool to get a picture of a missile silo. To a satellite boffin, the satellite white GCU, the story. They want to know the inclination, the eccentricity, and the orbital decay. They're looking for zombie satellites, dead hardware from the 70s that's still tumbling around and occasionally chirping out a signal.
So, before we get into the oops, I accidentally decloaked a stealth payload. Part of the story. How do they actually do it? I'm assuming they aren't just squinting at the sky with a pair of binoculars from the local hardware store.
Well, some of them actually do start with binoculars. If you know exactly where to look, you can see plenty of satellites with the naked eye. But the serious players use a combination of public data and specialized hardware. The foundation of the whole hobby is something called TLEs, or two-line element sets.
TLEs. Sounds like something I'd find in a spreadsheet that makes my eyes bleed. Break that down for me.
It's actually a very elegant bit of data. A TLE is a standard format for describing the list of orbital elements of an Earth-orbiting object at a given point in time. It's 2 lines of 70 characters each. It tells you the satellite's launch year, its position, its velocity, and how its orbit is changing. NORAD. The North American Aerospace Defense Command actually publishes a public catalog of these for thousands of objects.
Wait, why does the military just give out the coordinates for satellites? Isn't that like a bank posting the GPS coordinates of all its armored trucks?
It's about flight safety. Space is getting crowded. If you're SpaceX and you're launching another batch of Starlink satellites, you need to know where everything else is so you don't turn the orbital plane into a debris field. So, the US. Space Force maintains this public catalog. You can go to a site like Celestrak, which is run by Dr. T.S. Kelso. He's a legend in this community, and download the latest TLEs for almost anything up there.
Almost anything. I'm guessing the Zodiac or Keyhole spy satellites aren't on the recommended for public viewing list.
The military leaves the classified stuff out of the public catalog. They call them analogs or missing objects. And that is where the hobbyists get really competitive. This community treats finding a missing satellite like a high-stakes game of hide and seek. They use blind searches. They'll set up high-sensitivity cameras, often low-light security cameras like the Watek 902H, pointed at a specific patch of sky. They record the stars moving past, and then they use astrometric software to look for a tiny dot that's moving at a different speed or direction than the stars.
So they're basically reverse engineering the secret menu of the cosmos. I love the mental image of this. Herman, do these satellite boffins actually have conventions? Is there a SatCon where they all show up in their best parkas and argue about nodal precession?
It's mostly online, though there are small meetups. The real action happens on mailing lists like CSAT-L, which has been around since the 90s. It's very old school. You'll see posts from guys like Dr. Marco Langbroek in the Netherlands. He is probably the most famous SpySat tracker in the world. When North Korea launches a rocket, he's often the first one to calculate exactly where the payload ended up based on his own observations, often contradicting the official state media reports.
I have to wonder if these guys get regular visits from men in dark suits and trench coats. Excuse me, Mr. Langbroek. We noticed you've been staring at our classified signal intelligence bird for 3 hours. Would you like a tour of a very small windowless room?
You joke, but there is a real gray zone here. These hobbyists aren't breaking any laws. They're standing on public land, looking at the sky, and using math. You can't really arrest someone for being good at trigonometry. But the data they produce is incredibly high quality. The military has actually expressed concern that these hobbyists are providing free tracking data to adversaries. If you're a country that doesn't have a global network of radar stations, you can just follow the blogs of a few dedicated Dutch and Canadian hobbyists to know exactly when a US spy satellite is going to be over your territory.
It's the ultimate democratization of surveillance. We spent billions on stealth coatings and orbital maneuvers, and then some guy named Dave in Sheffield ruins the surprise because he noticed a glint that shouldn't be there. But let's talk about the why. What is the payoff? If you aren't selling this info to a foreign power, and you aren't trying to stop a war, why spend your Tuesday night calculating the decay rate of a Soviet-era rocket body?
It's the same impulse that drives people to collect stamps or restore old ham radios. It's the thrill of the hunt. There's a technical satisfaction in predicting exactly when an object is going to pass over your house and then seeing that tiny moving star appear right on schedule. It's a way of feeling connected to the high frontier. Plus, there's the space situational awareness aspect. These hobbyists often find things the pros miss. They track zombie satellites that have come back to life. They track secret fuel dumps. They even track secret spaceplane maneuvers.
The zombie satellite thing is cool. I remember reading about a satellite from the 60s that everyone thought was dead, and then some amateur radio guy picked up a signal from it decades later. It's like finding a ghost in the machine.
That was LES-1. It was a Lincoln experimental satellite launched in 1965. It failed to reach its intended orbit and was abandoned. Then, in 2013, an amateur radio operator in the UK picked up its telemetry. The onboard batteries had probably disintegrated, and the solar panels were powering the transmitter directly whenever it hit sunlight. That kind of discovery is the holy grail for this community.
Okay, so they have the TLEs, they have the cameras, and they have the radios. What about the software? If I wanted to start being a nuisance to the National Reconnaissance Office this weekend, what am I downloading?
For a beginner, heavens. Above is the gold standard. It's a website and an app that uses your GPS location to tell you exactly when the International Space Station or a Starlink train is passing over. It's very user-friendly. But if you want to go deeper, you look at things like Orbitron or gPredict. These are professional-grade tools. You feed them the TLE data, and they give you a real-time world map of where every satellite is. Some people even hook this software up to motorized antenna rotors so their radio dishes automatically track a satellite as it moves across the sky.
And that's how they listen to them.
Right, using an SDR, software-defined radio. It's a little USB dongle you can buy for $30. You plug it into your computer, attach an antenna, and you can visualize the radio spectrum. You can actually see the waterfall of signals coming down. You won't be able to read the encrypted military data, obviously, but you can see the signal strength. And that's the tip-off. If a satellite suddenly starts transmitting more heavily, or if its signal changes frequency, that tells you it's doing something. It's active.
This brings us back to the Iran-Israel situation Daniel mentioned. During that conflict, these trackers weren't just looking for zombies. They were watching the eyes in the sky. How did that actually play out?
Well, think about the logistics. If you're going to launch a drone strike or a missile barrage, you want to know what the other guy is seeing. During the peak of the tensions, hobbyists were tracking US. Orion satellites. Those are the massive signals intelligence birds with antennas the size of football fields. They noticed these satellites shifting their positions to get better coverage of the region. They also tracked the elegant birds. When a tracker posts on X, "Hey, USA 290 just did a massive burn to change its inclination," that is a huge signal to anyone paying attention that something major is about to happen.
So the OSIN guys see the tweet from the boffin and they go, okay, if the satellite is moving to look at Tehran, we should probably start looking at the ground level sensors in Tehran. It's a tiered system of intelligence.
And the boffins often get annoyed because the OSINT crowd brings a lot of noise and political heat to what they consider a quiet scientific pursuit. The trackers are like, "I just wanted to calculate the delta V of that maneuver." And the OSINT guys are like, "Does this mean World War III is starting?" It's a clash of cultures.
I can see why they'd be protective of their hobby. It's like being a bird watcher, and suddenly a bunch of military planners show up and start asking if the migratory patterns of the swallows indicate a troop buildup in Poland. It ruins the vibe. But, Herman, let's talk about the OPSEC implications. If I'm the Department of Defense, and I know that Dave in Sheffield is watching my every move, what do? Can you make a satellite stealth?
They try. There was a program called Misty back in the 90s. It was a series of stealth satellites designed to be invisible to radar and visual tracking. They allegedly used a dynamic inflatable shield that would reflect light away from Earth like a giant mirror, but the boffins found it anyway.
No way. How do you find a stealth satellite?
You look for what isn't there. They noticed a launch happened, but no new object appeared in the catalog, so they started doing fence observations. They'd have multiple observers in different countries watch the same track, where they expected a satellite from that launch to be. Eventually, someone caught a tiny, fleeting reflection. Once you have one data point, you can start calculating the orbit. Within a few weeks, the stealth satellite was being tracked by hobbyists every night. It's almost impossible to hide in space because the laws of physics are public knowledge. If you want to stay in orbit, you have to follow a specific path. If we know where you started and how fast you were going, we can figure out where you are.
It's like trying to hide a glowing marble in a dark room. No matter how much you paint it black, eventually it's going to pass in front of a candle, or in this case, a star.
That's a great way to put it. And the gray zone is getting even weirder with things like the secret space plane, the X-37B. The Air Force is very tight-lipped about what it does. It stays up for hundreds of days at a time. But the boffins track it religiously. They know whenever it changes orbit. They know when it's about to land. There was an instance where a hobbyist in the Netherlands actually photographed the X-37B in orbit, showing its payload bay doors were open. That is, information you can't get anywhere else.
I bet the folks at the Pentagon love that. Hey, look, a civilian just took a picture of our top secret space experiment. Great job, everyone. Let's go to lunch. But is there a point where this becomes dangerous? I mean, if these hobbyists are inadvertently helping the bad guys by providing tracking data, does the government ever try to shut down sites like Cellestrek?
They've tried to restrict data in the past. After the September 11th attacks, there was a big push to stop publishing TLEs for anything military related, but the community just went underground. They started their own private databases. And eventually, the government realized that if they didn't publish the data, they couldn't coordinate with other countries to avoid collisions. It's a transparency versus security trade-off. Nowadays, the military mostly just accepts that they are being watched. They've shifted their strategy to tactical responsiveness, changing orbits more frequently or using decoys, rather than trying to be completely invisible.
It's a cat and mouse game where the mouse has a PhD in orbital mechanics and the cat is a multi-billion-dollar government agency. I think I'm rooting for the mouse here.
It's hard not to. There's something very citizen scientist about it. But we should talk about the anorak side of this, the community itself. Daniel mentioned they are like radio hams. They have this very specific language. They talk about flashing, satellites. Those are objects that are tumbling and reflect sunlight in regular pulses. They talk about grazer satellites that just barely clip the Earth's shadow.
Do they have awards, like Best Discovery of a Cold War Spy Sat, or Most Accurate Prediction of a Re-entry?
Not official ones, but there is a lot of prestige involved. Being the first to recover a lost satellite, meaning finding its new orbit after it did a secret maneuver, is a huge deal. It's like getting the high score in a very nerdy arcade game. And it's not just about the glamour of spy sats. A lot of these guys are doing real work for the scientific community. They track space debris that the official sensors might miss. They monitor the health of weather satellites.
It's a massive unpaid workforce for space situational awareness. You'd think the government would be sending them thank you cards and fruit baskets instead of worrying about OBSEC.
Some parts of the government actually do appreciate it. NASA has worked with amateur observers in the past, but when you get into the world of the NRO and the Space Force, things get a bit more chilly. There's an inherent conflict between a classified mission and a hobby that is built on total transparency.
So, for the listeners who are hearing this and thinking, I want to be a boffin, what's the first step? Aside from buying a very warm coat and a thermos of coffee.
Start with your eyes. Go out on a clear night away from city lights about an hour after sunset. Check an app like Heavens above for an ISS pass. When you see that bright, steady light gliding across the sky, you're looking at a football field-sized laboratory moving at 17,000 miles per hour. That's the hook. If that gives you a thrill, then you start looking into SDRs and TLEs. Join a community like Our Satellites or look up the CSAT-L archives.
And maybe don't start by trying to find the most classified thing in the sky on day one. Ease into it. Start with a weather satellite.
Try to listen to a NOAA weather satellite. They transmit their images in the clear. You can actually build a simple turnstile antenna out of some PVC pipe and wire, plug it into an SDR, and download a live satellite photo of your own house as the satellite passes over. It's an incredible feeling. You realize that space isn't just something you see in movies, it's right there, and you can interact with it using $30 worth of hardware.
That is actually a great takeaway. We live in this world where everything is black boxed. We use technology every day, but we have no idea how it works. These satellite boffins are the ones prying the box open. They're saying, no, I want to see the gears turning. I want to know exactly how that signal gets from that point in space to my backyard.
And that brings up the bigger policy question. As space becomes more commercialized with tens of thousands of satellites from SpaceX, Amazon, and OneWeb, the boffins might be our best line of defense against orbital pollution. If a company's satellite fails and becomes a collision risk, but the company doesn't want to admit it, it's going to be an amateur tracker who breaks the news.
It's the eyes on the street theory, but for the exosphere. The more people watching, the harder it is for any one government or corporation to behave badly without anyone noticing.
That's the transparency argument. In the old days, space was the sole domain of two superpowers. Everything was secret. Now, space is a global commons. We have a stake in knowing what's up there. The boffins are essentially the volunteer park rangers of the orbital plane.
I like that. Volunteer park rangers of the exosphere. It's a lot more dignified than anoraks. But I still have this nagging thought about the security side. If I'm a military commander in a conflict zone, and I know my stealthy reconnaissance is being live blogged by a teenager in Estonia, that has to change how I operate. Does this mean the era of orbital secrecy is just over?
It's definitely evolving. You can't rely on, they don't know we're here anymore. You have to rely on, they know we're here, but they can't stop us. Or they know we're here, but they don't know exactly what we're looking at. It forces militaries to be more agile. It also makes counterspace capabilities more important. If you can't hide, maybe you try to dazzle the sensors or use electronic warfare. But for the average person, this gray zone is a net positive. It's one of the few areas where an individual with a bit of knowledge and a cheap radio can hold the most powerful organizations on Earth accountable.
It's the ultimate David versus Goliath story, except David is using a software-defined radio, and Goliath is a billion-dollar titanium bird. I think it's also a great example of how weird prompts lead to these deep dives into subcultures that most of us just walk past every day. I never thought about who was generating the data for the OSINT guys, but it makes total sense that there's this foundational layer of enthusiasts who are just in it for the love of the craft.
It's a beautiful intersection of high technology and old school hobbyism. It's very much in the spirit of the early internet sharing data for the sake of knowledge, building tools for the community, and not being afraid to ask what happens if I look over there.
So, to summarize for our listeners, the satellite boffins are not spies, they are not necessarily political activists, and they aren't looking for aliens. They are technical enthusiasts who use publicly available data strings called TLEs and cheap radio hardware to track the untrackable. In doing so, they've created a world of orbital transparency that makes it almost impossible for anyone to hide in space.
And if you want to join them, the barrier to entry has never been lower. You don't need a PhD, you just need curiosity and a willingness to learn a bit of orbital mechanics.
And maybe a very, very warm pair of socks. Space is cold, and so is a backyard in February. We've covered a lot of ground, or rather, a lot of orbit today. I think the big takeaway from me is that in 2026, secrecy is a very fragile thing. If you're doing something in the public sky, someone is going to see it.
And they're going to post the TLEs on a mailing list from 1994. That is the world we live in.
I love it. Well, I think that's a wrap on the boffins. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the show on its own steady orbit. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. They make the heavy lifting of our script generation possible. This has been My Weird Prompts.
If you're enjoying these deep dives, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps other curious minds find the show.
We'll see you in the next one. Stay curious and keep looking up.
Goodbye.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow take